I worked hard for years to buy my first car. One day later, my brother stole the keys, took it for a ride, and completely wrecked it. I had spent my entire youth scrimping and saving, skipping vacations, ignoring impulse buys, and driving my beat-up old sedan into the ground, just so I could finally afford the one thing I'd always wanted. A brand new car, completely mine, paid for with my own hard-earned money. The moment I signed the paperwork and the dealer handed me the keys, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, unadulterated pride in myself. I ran my fingers along the smooth, gleaming hood, inhaled the intoxicating scent of fresh leather seats, and thought, this is mine. Every part of it, every detail is mine. I hadn't even owned the car for a full day before my younger brother Jason decided my happiness was his for the taking. Jason, the child who'd been coddled and cosseted his entire life, had never broken a sweat for anything, never taken responsibility, and never faced a consequence that my parents couldn't sweep under the rug. He was the type to treat other people's things as if they were his by default, because that's how life had always worked for him. When I drove into my parents' driveway that evening to show off the car, Jason was already there, leaning against the garage with that familiar smirk of his. He barely even looked up from his phone when I parked. "Nice ride," he said, pushing himself off the wall and sauntering over, peering through the driver's side window, as if he'd already decided the car belonged to him. "What's the mileage?" "Less than 100, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral even though I could already feel my patience wearing thin. Jason let out a low whistle, nodding appreciatively, and then, without asking, reached for the handle and pulled the door open. "Let me take it for a spin." I immediately lunged to slam the door shut before he could climb in, shaking my head firmly. "No way. I just got it. You're not driving it?" Jazz rolled his eyes, as if I'd just told him he couldn't borrow $1. "Oh, come on, Emily, don't be such a control freak. It's just a car." "Exactly," I retorted. "It's just a car that I busted my ass to buy. You don't get to just take it." But Jason was never the type to hear no and accept it. He just smirked, shrugged, and backed away. But there was something in his expression that sent a warning chill down my spine, as if he already had a backup plan. I should have trusted my gut. Sorry for interrupting, but please like and subscribe. That night, I left the car keys on the entryway table for a few minutes while I went upstairs to get something from my room. When I came back down, the keys were gone, and so was my car. My hands clenched into fists as the realization set in. "Jason?" I stormed outside, my heart hammering. But by then he was long gone, the screech of tires echoing in the distance. I pulled out my phone and called his number, but I only got voicemail, over and over again. I was still fuming when, 2 hours later, my phone finally rang, but it wasn't Jason's number, it was an unfamiliar one. I answered, bracing myself. "Miss Anderson," a deep voice, calm but serious, said. "This is Officer Reynolds with the County Police Department. I'm calling about a vehicle registered under your name." My stomach dropped. "What's happened?" "There's been an accident." A pause. "The driver is unharmed, but the vehicle sustained significant damage." My grip tightened on the phone. "Who was driving?" The officer hesitated for only a second before answering. "A young man identifying himself as Jason Anderson." I didn't even remember driving to the scene of the accident. One moment, I was standing in my parents' entryway, gripping my phone with white knuckles. The next, I was pulling up behind police lights, my pulse a steady drum of rage. And there he was, my brother, standing next to what was left of my brand new car, arms crossed, looking utterly unfazed. The front bumper was destroyed, the hood crumpled, and one of the headlights was shattered. My beautiful, perfect car was ruined, and Jason? Jason was standing there like it was nothing. I got out of my beat-up old sedan, slamming the door harder than I meant to, my hands shaking as I walked towards him. "What the hell did you do?" Jason finally turned to face me, and then, in the single most infuriating moment of my entire life, he smirked. "Tough luck," he said, shrugging as if he'd just dropped my ice cream cone, not totaled my car. "But hey, don't freak out. Mom and Dad will make you forgive me." I felt those words hit me like a slap in the face. Mom and Dad will make me forgive him. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what he'd done. It was a smug, arrogant declaration that no matter how angry I was, no matter how much damage he'd caused, it wouldn't matter because my parents would smooth things over, just like they always did. I took a slow, measured breath, forcing down my rage, my hands clenched at my sides, my pulse thundering in my ears. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. Not this time. Has your sibling ever thought they could get away with anything? Tell me in the comments. I'm done leaking. I woke up the next morning with a splitting headache, my body still tense with the sheer frustration of the night before. My mind replayed every detail of that awful encounter at the crash site, my brother's smirking face haunting me like a nightmare that refused to end. My car, the brand new, hard-earned car, was gone, destroyed in an instant by someone who had never worked a day in his life, someone who had never faced a single consequence, someone who genuinely believed that my anger was nothing more than an inconvenience to his day. I knew, even before I stepped out of bed, that my parents would be calling me, that they'd demand a conversation, that they'd try to smooth this over like they always did, as if Jason's actions were just another minor mistake that we could forget about if I'd only be reasonable like a good daughter should be. Sure enough, the moment I checked my phone, I saw 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a text message from Jason that was so arrogant, I had to read it twice to believe my own eyes. Stop being dramatic, Em. It's just a car. Mom and Dad said they'll sort it out, so stop acting like it's the end of the world. No apology, no remorse, not even the slightest acknowledgement that he'd done anything wrong. Just pure entitlement dripping from every word, as if the real problem wasn't that he'd stolen and wrecked my property, but that I had dared to make a big deal out of it. I swallowed my rage, forcing myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself that getting worked up over a text message wasn't going to help me right now. Jason was always like this, and I knew exactly where he'd learned it. I drove to my parents' house. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel of my ancient backup car. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and weariness, already knowing exactly how this conversation was going to go. I walked in without knocking, dispensing with pleasantries, finding my parents sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, their expressions a perfect blend of forced concern and thinly veiled exasperation, as if I was the problem here, as if my reaction was what needed to be fixed. Jason sat slumped on one of the chairs, scrolling through his phone, looking completely unbothered, as if he was waiting for this whole thing to blow over so he could get on with his life, while I was left to pick up the pieces of what he'd ruined. My mother sighed heavily, setting down her coffee cup as if she was already exhausted by my presence, rubbing her temples as if she was the victim in all of this. Emily, honey, we need to talk about the situation, because this anger you're holding on to isn't healthy for anyone. I felt something cold in my chest, something quiet but dangerous, a slow-burning fury that I'd carried for years but had never fully allowed myself to acknowledge until now. My anger? I repeated, my voice strangely calm, my hands resting on the back of an empty chair, gripping the wood so tightly that my fingers ached. You think my anger is the problem here? My father let out a long sigh, exchanging a quick glance with my mother. Their silent communication made it painfully clear that they were united in this, that their decision had already been made before I'd even walked through the door. Sweetheart, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. It's just a car. Jason didn't mean to crash it, and we don't think it's fair to punish him so harshly for something that was clearly an accident. I felt something inside me snap, something that had been held together by sheer force of will for years, something that had been stretched and pulled and torn one too many times. He stole it, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, because if I let myself feel anything, I knew I would explode. I told him no. He took my keys anyway. He stole my car, wrecked it, and then smirked at me because he knew you'd cover for him, just like you always do. Jason sighed dramatically, finally looking up from his phone, rolling his eyes as if the entire conversation wasn't worthy of him. Jesus, Em, you're acting like I murdered someone, he muttered, shaking his head, his arrogance radiating from him in waves. I messed up, okay? Get over it. My mother reached out, placing a gentle hand on mine, her eyes pleading, her expression carefully crafted into something that looked like love, but was really just manipulation wrapped in a prettier package. Emily, he's your brother, she said softly, tilting her head as if she was speaking to a toddler in need of correction. I know you're upset, but family forgives, sweetheart. That's what we do. We forgive each other. I stared at her, at the sheer audacity of those words, at the way she had so effortlessly placed the responsibility on me to fix what Jason had done, as if my feelings were an inconvenience, as if my hard work meant nothing, as if my sacrifices didn't matter, as long as Jason was happy. I realized in that moment that I had spent my entire life being conditioned to accept this treatment, to believe that my needs came second, that my anger was unjustified, that my pain was something I had to swallow quietly for the sake of keeping the family peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into submission this time. So, I did something I'd never done before. I smiled. It was small, just a flicker of amusement, but it was enough to make my mother pause, enough to make Jason glance at me with something almost resembling suspicion. "You know what?" I said, my voice light, my expression deceptively calm, because I'd already made up my mind. "You're absolutely right, Mom. Family forgives, and I don't want to hold on to this anger anymore." I watched as relief flooded their faces, as Jason's smirk returned, as they all leaned back in their chairs, convinced that they'd won, that they had successfully broken me down into the version of myself that they preferred. But they had no idea what I was planning. They had no idea that behind my pleasant smile and my easy agreement, I was already putting things in motion. I was going to make Jason pay for what he did. He just didn't know it yet. I had spent my entire life being told that family comes first, that forgiveness is a virtue, that holding grudges only leads to bitterness. But as I sat in my car outside the insurance office, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized that those rules had only ever applied to me. Jason had never been expected to forgive or compromise or sacrifice, because Jason had never faced real consequences. Not once. Not ever. Not in all the years he had coasted through life on a wave of other people cleaning up his messes. But that was about to change. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. When I walked into the insurance office, the air conditioning blasted my skin, a stark contrast to the fire simmering in my chest, the calculated rage that had been fueling me since the moment Jason had sneered in my face and told me our parents would make me forgive him. The woman at the desk barely looked up as she typed something into her computer, her voice clipped and professional as she asked how she could help. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before speaking, knowing that once I set this in motion, there would be no going back. "I need to file a claim for my car," I said, keeping my tone even, my expression carefully neutral. She nodded, clicking a few more times before glancing up at me. "Was it an accident? Do you have a police report?" "Yes, there's a report," I said, my pulse steady, my decision unwavering. "And I need to report it as unauthorized use." That made her pause. She blinked once, tilting her head slightly as if trying to determine whether she'd misheard me. "Unauthorized use," she repeated, her voice laced with a note of curiosity. "Are you saying your vehicle was stolen?" I could have said yes, but I knew better than to lie outright, especially when the truth was just as damning. "I never gave permission for him to take it," I clarified, choosing my words carefully, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. "I explicitly told him he couldn't drive my car, and he took it anyway." "That's theft, isn't it?" The woman hesitated for only a second before nodding slowly, typing something into her system, her gaze flicking towards the screen as she read through what I assumed were company policies on situations like this. "If you can provide proof that you denied him permission and he took the vehicle regardless, then yes, this qualifies as unauthorized use." I reached into my purse, pulling out my phone, my fingers moving swiftly as I pulled up the text messages from Jason, the ones where I'd told him no, the ones where he'd laughed it off like my words meant nothing. I turned the screen towards her, watching as she read over the messages, her eyebrows raising slightly before she nodded again. "This should be sufficient," she said, her voice now purely professional, her fingers moving over the keyboard with precision. "Since you're filing for unauthorized use, the liability will not fall on you. It will transfer to the driver." The liability would transfer to Jason. The reality of it sank in slowly, like warm honey drizzling over the cold steel of my fury, coating it in something rich and satisfying. Jason, who had spent his entire life escaping responsibility, was finally going to have to answer for something. Jason, who had laughed in my face and told me I would have to forgive him, was about to learn what it felt like when the world didn't bend to his will. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though inside, My heart was thrumming with a strange, unfamiliar thrill. The woman glanced at her screen, adjusting her glasses before answering. Well, given the extent of the damage, the estimated total he'll be responsible for is somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. As I inhaled $30,000 to $40,000, I felt victorious. Jason was never punished, simply slapped on the wrist. I wouldn't move to stop that weight from falling on him. After leaving work, the sun was brighter, the air was sharper, and I felt happy for the first time since this nightmare began. I felt strong, feeling free. Later that night, I scrolled through social media in my apartment, narrowing my eyes when I saw Jason's latest post, a photo of him and his friends at a bar with drinks, and his usual arrogant caption. A few cocktails can fix a bad day. Some need to relax and move on. Life's too short for small worries. Little things. The sheer audacity of it sent a ripple of laughter through me, a sound so foreign that it startled me for a moment before I leaned back against the couch, shaking my head in amusement. Jason felt he won. He thought it was over. He believed our parents had saved him again, that everything would be well, and that I had swallowed my anger and moved on as usual. Before the insurance claim was approved, Jason wouldn't know I wasn't letting it go. Jason learned the hard way this time, and he discovered what I did too late. At dinner, I felt their expectations suffocating me, as if they had decided this would be my night to conform. My mother decorated the table like a holiday gathering with candles, roasted chicken, and buttery mashed potatoes to underscore that this was a family night of reconciliation and a scene meticulously constructed to smooth over an unneeded disagreement. My father led the table with his usual controlled, yet easygoing demeanor. However, I understood why we were here, why this supper had been scheduled so soon after the accident, and why Jason sat across from me with that insufferable smirk and his phone next to his plate, as if he couldn't pretend it mattered. I knew it was coming, the speech they had all practiced, the words they would use to convince me that my wrath was unwarranted, that my reaction was overblown, and that Jason deserved my forgiveness because he was family. I sat there with my hands in my lap and a large envelope between my fingers under the table, feeling only an uncomfortable serenity because, unlike them, I knew how this evening would end. Jason spoke first, his voice dripping with adolescent arrogance, his remarks condescending, and his smirk growing as he sat back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "Have you calmed down, or are you still having a tantrum about a foolish car?" I didn't notice the comments since I anticipated him to make a joke and try to make me look crazy in front of our parents. I tilted my head, giving him a weak, unreadable smile, watching as his confidence grew in the face of what he thought was submission, and my parents looked happy, thinking they had won. "Emily, sweetheart, I know this has been a stressful situation for you, but we really need to put this behind us as a family," my mother said with a dramatic sigh, sounding exasperated but gentle, as if she were the only one with the patience to deal with me. "Jason made a mistake, but your anger won't help." My father, ever the voice of reason and always level-headed and realistic, nodded as he carved his chicken without glancing up from his plate. "Emily, life is too short for this. The car is just a car. Things can be replaced, but not family." Jason seemed to enjoy my apparent defeat, his ego growing with each passing second and his sneer getting more unpleasant. He swirled his fork, seeming to frown. "Seriously, calm. I swear you always overreacted and exaggerated. I crashed a car, not your life. You'll heal." After he laughed, my mother comforted me across the table, and my father nodded in approval of Jason's words. I cautiously removed the envelope from under the table and presented it to Jason. All three stopped when thick paper touched polished wood. Jason hardly looked up, shaking his head and rolling his eyes like I was being dramatic, like whatever I was about to do couldn't possibly be worth his time. "Is this an angry letter about how I injured you?" "Read it," I said simply, my voice even, my expression unreadable. My tone must have grabbed his attention because, for the first time that night, his delight diminished and his smirk faltered as he hesitated before tearing open the envelope. After pulling out the papers and scanning the top, his face lost color so quickly that it was almost delightful to watch, almost poetic in its irony. I watched in silence as his hands tightened around the pages, as his mouth opened and closed without sound, as his entire posture shifted from smug arrogance to quiet, dawning horror. My mother frowned, confusedly staring between us, tightening her fingers on mine. "Emily, what's this?" Jason muttered, wrinkled documents in his hand. "You did what?" I sipped my wine, letting the stillness make them uncomfortable, and weighed Jason's shoulders before speaking softly and politely. "Brother, the insurance report is final. The one that officially declares you guilty." Tension suffocated the air instantaneously. The truth hit my parents. My father looked up from his plate, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes sharp and calculating, trying to figure out how Jason had gone from untouchable to accountable. My mother removed her palm from mine and glanced through the papers in despair, her breath quickening as she read the black-inked numerals. For the first time, Jason looked afraid, and I was more pleased than ever. Jason pulled back from the table, shaking the cutlery, and his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He gasped, his face contorted in surprise and rage, and his hands crumpled the insurance paper. He remained there, his chest rising and falling, glaring at me with something that seemed almost like betrayal, as if I had wronged him by refusing to roll over and accept what he had done, as if my boldness in forcing him face the repercussions of his actions was the actual. His voice was low and wrathful when he spoke. "Emily, this isn't funny. Tell me you're kidding." I waited to respond, watching his face flash worry and looking from me to our parents like he expected them to intercede before things got out of hand. My mother's lips were slightly parted, her fingers held her blouse, and her gaze darted around the documents in front of her, looking for a way out or information to end this. Always calm, my father breathed deeply and placed his palms on the table. Though steady, his voice was dangerously close to frustration. "Emily," he murmured, his gaze piercing and weighted with expectation, as usual when he wanted me to fold. "This is too far. That sibling retribution is severe and vengeful." Jason chuckled bitterly, raking his fingers through his hair as he left the table and paced like a caged beast, shaking his head in bewilderment. "This is ridiculous. You're ruining my life over a car." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed across my chest, expressionless, voice calm. "No, Jason, I won't wreck your life. I won't clean up your trash this time." My mother inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her chest, as if I had physically struck her, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't believe I was refusing to play the role she had assigned me since childhood. The responsible one, the one who forgave, smoothed things over, and sacrificed so Jason never had to. "Sweetheart, this is going to follow him for years," she muttered, shivering, her fingers closing around the papers as if to erase them. "The financial load of insurance claims can ruin a person's credit, future, and ability to—" "Mom," I interjected, my voice harsher, my tolerance eroding, my hands pressing against the table to prevent erupting. "So he can coast through life without consequences. So he can take everything he wants without bothering about others. To keep letting you and Dad shield him from reality?" Jason smacked his hands into his chair back, lips gritting, body so tense I thought he would break in half. He exclaimed, "You're honestly acting like I killed someone," his eyes burning and voice quivering. "My error. Your car was stolen and wrecked. I was a jerk about it. I realize what happened, but you?" He shook the papers in my mother's hands, rageful. "You attempted to make things worse for me." Those words sparked a hidden anger I had been holding for years. I slowly stood up, staring at him, my voice quiet but immovable, my rage steely and exact. "If you didn't care when I lost what I worked for, why should I care now that you're losing something?" The words hit him harder than I expected, knocking the breath from his lungs, his expression momentarily faltering, a flicker of something almost like regret flashing across his face. But it was gone just as quickly, buried beneath layers of entitlement, of anger, of the unwavering belief that I was the one being unfair. My father exhaled and stroked his temples as if my cave reluctance frustrated him. "Emily, I know you're mad, but this is wrong. The family. Nobody hurts each other." Shaking my head, I laughed sourly with crossed arms. "None of us hurt each other? Dad, that's amusing because you let Jason hurt me." Jason scowled and grabbed his hair like he was pulling it out. He murmured, "I don't have that amount of money," quivering his voice as he realized, "How am I expected to pay?" For the first time that night I smiled, but it was cold, hard, and unforgiving. "Figure it out," I said, turning my back on him and striding toward the door, refusing to look back or show him any hesitation in my expression. My mother yelled after me, pleading with me to think this through, be sensible, and not tear the family apart. But I didn't stop, turn, or delay. Jason stole from me and would return it for the first time, like it or not. I could imagine Jason pacing in his overpriced apartment, running his hands through his hair, calling our parents every hour to fix this, just like they had fixed everything else for him, never considering that maybe this was too much. Days passed, but Jason didn't call, text, or try to reach out. I knew my parents had money, but I knew they couldn't spend $40,000 without sacrificing, digging into their security accounts, and upsetting their comfortable lifestyles. I know my parents disliked discomfort. When Jason arrived at my flat, I recognized him without looking through the peephole. My assumptions were confirmed by the violent hammering on my door, the impatient huff of breath from the other side, and the whining through the wood. I waited to answer, letting him simmer, letting the stillness make him worry if I would even acknowledge him, and letting him feel my rage and powerlessness when he stole my car and smashed it without consideration. When I answered the door, I saw him looking disheveled with larger circles under his eyes, his normally confident posture somewhat stooped, and his fingers twitching at his sides, like he was barely keeping himself together. I leaned against the doorframe, crossed my arms, arched an eyebrow, and looked neutral. Something wrong, Jason? His jaw clenched at my words, his eyes burning with something dark, frightening, and like a last-ditch attempt at control. You must undo this, he said in a quiet, anxious voice. I don't care what you want, remove this. I breathed calmly through my nose, shaking my head slightly, my countenance consistent and my patience non-existent. It's done, I said calmly. You'd need a lawyer and $30,000 to fight it, and we know you don't have either. For a fleeting second, I saw something in his face shatter, a tiny fracture in his lifelong map of confidence, a flare of pure, unfiltered panic he couldn't control. As swiftly as it emerged, it was gone, replaced by wrath, resentment, and his usual protective attitude when things went wrong. The loud, bitter chuckle came as he ran both hands through his hair before lowering them to his sides, shoulders strained, breathing irregular. You hate me so much? He demanded, his voice increasing and his composure eroding. You really believe I deserve my life destroyed over a car? I inclined my head, eyeing him with a chilly, detached, and apathetic enjoyment. Jason, you wrecked my automobile without thinking. Why should I worry about damaging your bank account? He clenched his fists, flared his nostrils, shook with rage, and cried out in despair. This is unjust, Emily. You're punishing me for something minor. Okay, my error. And foolish error. Your actions are evil, premeditated, and insane. I felt my lips twitch. Not quite a smile, not quite anything at all. Just a small, satisfied acknowledgement of the irony of the moment, of the way Jason was finally experiencing something he had never once considered before. Accountability. You'll figure it out, I muttered, shifting my weight onto one foot and speaking gently, almost dismissively. You always do that. Jason had nothing to say for the first time in his life when his phone buzzed in his pocket before I could close the door. I saw his expression change into fear, his fingers trying to get it out, and his eyes scanning the screen with uncertainty and dread. Leaning nonchalantly against the doorframe, I saw his expression darken, jaw tighten, and fingers hold the phone so firmly that his knuckles turned white. What's wrong, Jason? His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to say something, but no words came out, just a sharp, uneven breath, just the sound of his own world crumbling around him, and I knew in that exact moment that he had finally gotten the message I had been waiting for him to receive. The one from his employer, informing him that his reckless behavior had raised concerns, explaining that his recent promotion was now being reevaluated, and making it clear that Jason was totally alone for the first time. I didn't wait for him to look up at me, see his complete understanding, or hear his pitiful justification or desperate appeal. I gently closed the door in his face with a leisurely, knowing, happy smile.